Well, good morning. I'm Pete Najarian. This is The Take for Market Rebellion. And after Cinco de Mayo, we had a pretty interesting day yesterday. As a matter of fact, going into the close of Cinco de Mayo, May 5th, we had a pretty interesting drop in the last 45 minutes of the day. Now, the markets were screaming and holding on to gains all throughout the session until about the last 45 minutes. And then we started to see the markets tip over. As a matter of fact, the Dow gave up 250 points late in the day, 45 minutes into the close. Yeah, the Nasdaq lost 100 points in that last 45 minutes or so. Now, both still finished positive, but the idea of watching the markets and how these moves have been occurring of late, and you go back to last Friday and then Monday and then Tuesday, really, really interesting in terms of very volatile moves at specific times of day. And it's been that last section of the day where we've really seen some very powerful moves. Yesterday being one of those kind of moves. Now, oil still up around that $25 level, and highs of the day is where it closed. So that was pretty impressive as we looked at across all of the marketplace. But we talk about the Nasdaq all the time. Nasdaq finished up about 1% on the day. That's pretty impressive, quite honestly, even with those late day losses. But here's what those losses look like. Microsoft went from 183 down to 180. You got Apple went from a little over 301 down to 297. Tesla 784 down to 768. Netflix, Google, you go down the line, you get the idea. Everything at once in that final 45 minutes. Go take a look at those charts. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Just a big, sharp move to the downside. Financials really started to slip. Now, energy, that slipped throughout the day. That was not just the last 45 minutes. For whatever the reasons yesterday, energy just kind of started moving to the downside throughout the session. Now, the volatility index, we've been talking about these ranges for a while. 32 to 35 was a range. Then we talked about a range maybe moving back up because of that big move last Friday. Well, that didn't last very terribly long. So it looks like we're right back to where we were before, somewhere between, call it 32, 35, maybe call it 30 to 35. Last night closed 33.50. So we also ran into earnings last night. We had Disney. Those were pretty interesting numbers and interpretations that come out of that. Stock moved all over the place in the after hours. You also had Beyond Meat. You had Activision. Now, Activision, boy, they had some incredible numbers they were able to produce. The strong demand that they talked about being up on a demand side of about 21% year over year. That's just extraordinary and not necessarily unexpected. We know there are stay-at-home stocks out there. We talk about them all the time, the social stocks, as well as Netflix, anything in the streaming world. So there have been areas where we know we've seen exactly what the circumstances are of being shut down, locked down. Those names have been absolutely putting it out there and getting the right numbers that you'd even expect them to get. And there's been some surprises along the way as well. So this morning, markets had some pretty interesting movement because we suddenly heard about the private sector job cuts. And those numbers, 20 million jobs in the month of April, that's just extraordinary. And yet you look over at the markets themselves, just kind of hanging in there. And that's definitely surprising. The major indices, you had the Dow is up about 0.5%, NASDAQ up about 1%. The NASDAQ still holding on to about 1%. Dow's giving a little bit of it back as we're talking right now, but it was a pretty quick, sharp reversal off of those private numbers and the job numbers. And that certainly makes a total sense because some of the read-throughs that we've had, and we all do this each and every morning when we get all of this information, and the Fed continues to be very supportive. And we all know you don't want to fight the Fed. That's been a statement that's been out forever. But in this particular case, with the trillions of dollars, it makes some sense of why we have made a bit of a surge to the upside off of those lows that we'd seen. Now, there are certain names that are performing again today, the usual suspects. You've got Microsoft, you've got Google, you've got Apple, you've got Netflix, you've got Facebook, it just goes on and on. But a lot of the same names each and every day are the names we talk about. Now, chip space, always interesting as well. And that is an area where we've seen so much unusual option activity in the chips. We've had it in Micron, we've had it in Intel, we've had it in AMD, we've had it in Marvell, across the board, Applied Materials. I mean, take your pick. You can find where we have seen unusual not only the unusual option activity, but the production of these names after some of that unusual option activity has been right there as well, and very, very impressive. So a lot of different spaces where we've had some pretty good success, and we continue to see all kinds of different activities. Taiwan Semiconductor is one of the names that's hitting today, as a matter of fact. Now, what I think is really interesting here is when you've got Apple trading back over, it was over 300, pulled back, over 300 again today. It's pretty interesting because when you look through some of the numbers and some of the concerns that everybody have and the production levels and all of that, to see Apple just kind of just moving to the upside and the buyers just continue, it's about balance sheets, folks. It's about where you are on different levels of not only the balance sheet, but the companies themselves and those that are in the cloud and those that are in the communications through the cloud, all of that. Those are going to be some of your stronger names. And take a look at Apple. I mean, it's just 10% off of its all-time highs. I look over at Microsoft, $7 away from the all-time highs. So it does give you a little sense of the movements in certain areas. There's certainly some names that just continue to come under pressure. They've rallied, but they get pressure. We look at some of these industrial names. Boeing comes to mind, where it's well off the lows. It's also well off some of the highs since the pandemic began as well. So a lot of movement there. But we always want to hit you with a little bit of unusual option activity. We had some in Microsoft just the other day. We talked about those 180 this week expiring calls, trading around $1. Well, you got to use discipline. We call it all the time. We talk about discipline dictates action. That's what we're about here, Market Rebellion. Understanding your risks, understanding the risk profile, and knowing the disciplines, knowing what you're going to do within a trade. The second you buy something, you have to already know, where will I sell it on a loss? Where will I sell it on a gain? Where will I trim it? Those are the questions that you have to have answers to when you begin, because it gives you that much more of an opportunity for success, because obviously not every trade's going to work. So you have to know when to cut as well. So you've got to have a plan in place of how you're going to proceed. And that's something we talk about all the time. Got great educators over at Market Rebellion as well. Starbucks stood out for me today, and here's why. This is a stock that so many loved it at around 100. Didn't make any sense to me. It felt stretched, and that's why I wasn't there. But now we look at Starbucks, and I was shocked because I hadn't looked at this name in quite a while, trading $74 today. And they're buying 3,000 of this week's 76 calls. They're only 30 cents. Risk reward, I like that kind of a trade. It doesn't have to make some gigantic move. It does have to move rapidly because these expire Friday, but that's only a couple of days away. But we still have 2.5 days to trade, right? So that gives you an opportunity. I like when I see these types of things where there's an inexpensive option for a risk reward that could be something of value. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but that's exactly what we're looking for all the time. We talk about unusual option activity. I'm Pete Najarian. This is The Take. Have a great day. Be safe, be smart. Social distancing. Always remember about that as well. Take care.